Welcome, everybody. It is my great pleasure to introduce David Mellins, who's presenting today on figures of speech and the role of ornamentation in the Udānavarga. This is a genre of Buddhist scripture, you could say, yeah? David is a Buddhist translator and scholar of Sanskrit poetics. He received his PhD from Columbia University, specializing Alaṅkāra, Shastra, and all it encompasses. Indra and I met David maybe the first time in 2015 or so in California at a Green Gulch all-day Sanskrit chanting retreat. And I think you're all really lucky to be here, both online and in person, to witness this. No, you haven't.
Well, you know my name now, so I don't have to introduce myself in that way. I'm delighted to be here. This place holds a special place, actually, in my heart. And thanks to Shanta and Indira for inviting me to speak. It's a nice opportunity to actually integrate two of the fields that I've spent the most time with, both academically and professionally, and even introspectively, you could say. I have known this place for quite some time, in particular because I would come here to visit one of my teachers, R.K. Sharma, who was a very important figure in my life. Some of you may have had the opportunity to meet him and study with him, but frequently he would come for part of the summer, a good portion of the summer, and I would come, and he would always read Sanskrit with me, and Mataji would cook dinner, and you know, it felt like a second father to me. And he was instrumental in me developing an interest in Alaṅkāra Shastra, and just out of a stroke of fate, the text that I worked on for my PhD dissertation was a text that was really beloved to him as well. So that created an extra strength to our bond. So just a little background about my professional and Sanskrit orientation. I think Shanta mentioned something, but I started studying Sanskrit as an undergraduate at Columbia, where I was really interested in Eastern religions. And during that time, I met a graduate student who told me that if I really wanted to study Buddhism seriously, I should start studying Sanskrit right away because it took a little time. And so I followed instructions with that, and I kind of took to the language. It was systematic. It reminded me a little bit of mathematics, except that it had narrative content to it, and it dealt with really cool metaphysical subjects. And so I continued. After I received my BA, I went to Nepal for a year to sort of just explore more directly the cultures that I had been studying. And I also had the opportunity to study Sanskrit with teachers there. And then I miraculously got into some graduate schools and chose Columbia. And there I studied with a man named Tubb, Dr. Gary Tubb, who's now, well, just I think retired from University of Chicago, who was a wonderful scholar of Alaṅkāra Shastra, among other things, Kavya, Kumara Sambhava, as a matter of fact, he was a great scholar of. I feel myself really blessed in terms of the training that I received, including that I had in such places as Varanasi and Sarnath, and in Mysore, with scholars that are probably too numerous to mention here, but I extend my thanks to them. So thank you again for having me. And, I think one thing I did want to mention was that this place is quite remarkable, as was R.K. Sharma. And from what I gather, your great guru, Brahmaswati Saraswati, sorry. Oh my goodness, Brahmananda Saraswati. And why that is so is because they represent the living force of Sanskrit. And also I have a lot of gratitude for all of you who really strive to make it a living force and not a subject of dissection. And that's very important. And when I met R.K. Sharma and I heard the sound of his voice, and I realized that I actually was sitting next to a living representative of the Sanskrit language, the force, the animation, and the cultural extension of it. It was fantastic. So please keep doing what you're doing. Thank you. I am going to talk about a Buddhist subject here, and the orientation, metaphysical and religious, may be a little different, but I did want to just mention that I've done a fair amount of reading in the Agama tradition as of late, and it seems to me that much of the Buddhist critique, philosophically, was not really directed against the Brahmanical tradition, even though in the West it frequently gets interpreted that way. His main opponents were from actually the Shramana traditions, okay, sort of people who were practicing asceticism and different types of yoga, who upheld heterodox views regarding, say, nihilism, sometimes hedonism, forms of hedonism, Epicureanism, which were, and in particular nihilistic views, were really his main opponents in the debates that he had. And so the text that I'm going to speak mostly about to you, the Udānavarga, the final chapter is called the Brahmana. So that lets you know that he really did have respect for the tradition, that you all are descendants of. So, and I understand that you did lose a very important member of your Sangam here recently, and my hearts go out to you. And I'd like to recite a verse from the Udānavarga, actually the third verse, but kind of the first verse proper of the first chapter on impermanence. And I think you'll find it meaningful. Anitya bata samskara upada vyaya dharminaha utpadyahi narudyante tesham vyupashama sukham. Conditionings are impermanent. Having arisen, they pass away. They change. They're subject to birth and death. The transcendence of these is bliss. So you understand when we think of conditionings or conditioning phenomena, usually...
David, could you read that one more time?
Sure. Anitya, bata, alas. Anitya, impermanent, bata, alas. Samskara, conditionings, or perhaps conditioned phenomena. Utpadavyaya dharminaha, having the properties of birth and death. Utpadyahi nirudyante, having arisen, they cease. Tesham vyupashamaha sukham, the complete transcendence, pacification, cessation of these is bliss. Okay. So you can understand that both in terms of the conditionings that we call, which are sentient, animals, human beings. But you can also understand that as the conditionings that are every moment of our experience, right? Every phenomena. All of those are like that in every moment, and they're constant changing in that. And that is the philosophy of Buddhism. And when you transcend that, okay, and you can transcend that in different ways, then there is bliss. Okay. So, I guess have a little bit of ground to cover here because I have to do a little bit of background, particularly on the Buddhist scripture that I am going to talk to you, which is called the Udānavarga. And as Shanta mentioned, this is one of the 12 limbs of Buddha Vachana, what we might call Buddhist scriptures. It's the speech of the Buddha that's otherwise known in Agama as Agama. Okay. And sometimes these limbs are mentioned as 9, and in modern traditions we tend to know of them as, anybody? People heard of the tree Pitaka? Yeah, three baskets. Usually that's what we think of. That would be Sutra, Abhidharma, and Vinaya, or Sutra, Vinaya, and Abhidharma, right? So why are they considered 12? Well, in the Agama tradition, there actually were many more classes of scriptures. I think for institutional simplicity and maybe cataloging purposes, they get reduced to 3. But there are 12 limbs, okay? And those would be Sutra, discourses, Gaya, reiterations, Vyakarana, which in this case means revelatory statements, predictions, Gata, odes, Udāna, we'll call it inspired teachings for now, or aphorisms, Nidana, narratives describing teaching occasions, okay? Avadana, heroic acts, Itivritika, fables, Jataka, past life narratives, Vaipulya, episodic discourses, Adbhuta Dharma, extraordinary events, and Upadesha, the instructions. Now, I'll confess to you that these categories are a little confusing. There's considerable overlap amongst them. And even if you were to read one, say, scripture, one sutra, or one Vinaya, you would actually feel like this has all of those. And I believe this is true. And the more that I'm encountering this, more that I feel that these 12 categories aren't so much meant to categorize entire scriptures, but rather the different types of teachings that you find, okay? So some expressions, what we call Buddha Vachana, some teachings are going to be sutra-like, some will be Gaya, some will be Vyakarana. And this really is just meant so that you understand how to interpret a teaching in the tradition. So I believe that is the most important understanding to carry from these 12 limbs. Okay. The Udānavarga also has a parallel scripture which is more well known. It's in the Pali language, and it's called the Dhammapada. I think probably a number of you have read this. Okay. Now, let's examine what the name of the genre means, Udāna. Actually, most common meaning of this is, yes? Upwards, Udāna, going upwards, and breathing inward, okay? The in-breath in some ways. So how does that pertain to, say, what we've come to understand is something like aphorism or occasion teaching? Maybe we could think of it as a kind of inspiration, so filling up, okay? Getting nourishment, taking in teaching. Okay, so these are teachings, unlike, say, the sutras, which are extended discourses, usually localized at one place with an audience of humans, gods, Gandharvas, etc., or if it's the Mahayana tradition, or a group of consistent monks. The Udānas were typically occasioned by a certain sighting or incident or a dialogue that was happening in a monastery, a debate. Usually there's one circumstance which inspired the teaching, gave rise to it. These are the Udānas. Vargas are chapters. And in the case of the Udānavarga, the chapters are arranged by topics, 33 of them, as I mentioned before. And so the Udānavarga as a scripture, as a Buddha vachana, is a little confusing, because technically you could understand it to have two authors: the Buddha who provided the teachings on the particular occasion, and the compiler of the Udānavarga, a monk called Dharmatrata, or protected by Dharma. And what he did was he had a great memory, and he remembered all of these individual instructions which had been, collected amongst the monks, and he did arrange them into 33 chapters according to their topics. So, and these are topics which you can imagine are very pertinent to the practice of Buddhism, such as impermanence, desire, heedfulness, mindfulness, etc. Okay, so we also have to talk about how I'm going to, what we're doing here in terms of interpreting figures of speech. Now, the Udānavarga is perhaps one of the most beloved treatises. It's one of the reasons why is because it is exceedingly literary. Okay, the instructions are very cogent, direct, but they also enable a great degree of polyvalence. That is, they can be interpreted in many ways. And this is because the figures of speech that are used allow for this. Okay? And amongst Buddhist teachings, right, there are two types, two general categories in terms of definitive teachings, right, which speak pretty directly and literally about the instruction. I think in the Agama tradition, it's spoken by the Buddha himself that in the future, warning his monks that in the future, people will speak in such a way where people are more interested in the style of what they're saying than in the content. And in his point of view, really teachings were much more directed towards, really getting to the point. Okay, so definitive teachings are the most important teachings. However, interpretable teachings in certain cases are more effective, particularly when the content of the teaching is an experience which maybe transcends direct speech. And it is my view that the Udānavarga very successfully, through its figurative methodologies, allows for a combination of definitive teaching and interpretable teaching. Okay. The Udānavarga was written in Sanskrit. What language did the Buddha teach in? Maybe. More likely something like Ardha-Magadhi, which would have been a Prakrit language that was spoken in the northern region. Okay. During the proselytic period of Buddhism, right? After Ashoka sent missions in all directions. One of his sons went southward, southeastward towards Sri Lanka, South India, and the language that was spoken in that region was Pali. Other missionaries went to the northwest, right, towards Pakistan and Afghanistan, and even towards Central Asia. And in those regions, perhaps the most common scholarly language was Gandhari. So there are Dharmapadas. Okay, another word for Udāna is maybe you call Dharmapada, right? Like Dhammapada in Pali. And those were actually spoken in the regional languages. The Buddha spoke directly to people. Okay, he didn't want to only speak to elite and intellectually sophisticated people. He wanted to speak in a common language. And such was his religious, spiritual charisma that he could directly speak to people in a single statement and have people supposedly hear whatever language they understood. Okay. But the languages were transmitted in the early period in the agamas, this is, in regional language. So either in Pali in the south and in Gandhari, Ardha-Magadhi, and other languages in the north and in the northwest. So how did the Udānavarga come to be written down and compiled in Sanskrit and considered the very sequence of words that was used by the Buddha, Buddha Vachana? It's an interesting fact. Many of you may know that while the Buddha was teaching, the Sangha was very consolidated, very devoted, and without much discord. But after his death, people had differences of opinions about what he really taught, what was the meaning of the teachings. And there were different councils that were held to try to resolve certain discordances in the view of what was the true teaching of the Buddha, okay? And what the emphasis was. Was it more on monastic purity, or was it more on things like compassion? And then there were doctrinal issues as well that emerged. The one that we know, of course, eventually was the division of the Mahayana teachings. But before that, there was something called the Mahasangika school, which opted for a less rigid view about monastic, adherence to a strict monastic code, but allowing for a greater breadth of understanding of non-duality. Okay, so there were these differences of views, and there was a growth of a tradition called Abhidharma. Okay, which were the teachings which explained, systematized the teachings that were found in the sutras, and explained them in a way that allowed people to recognize the specific states of minds that were encountered during meditation. Okay, and you could say that the pathway to enlightenment became far more delineated in the Abhidharma tradition, what we call the marga. Okay, and there were 5 different margas. So there was the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, path of accumulation, the path of seeing, where you actually had direct experience of the Four Noble Truths, the path of meditation, where you contemplated, meditated on those, and then the path of no more learning. And so the path to arhathood traversed these 5 pathways. In addition, the progression of the 4 dhyanas, the 4 meditative states that Buddhists would go through, okay, to greater and greater experience of subtlety and meditation, were understood in terms of 3 realms, which are the desire realm, where we are right now, and then the form realm, where you have deities of the form realm, and the formless realm. Obviously, no bodies there, no desires, because there are no forms to desire, right? Mental states, though, okay? So these delineation of the path and Abhidharma created a need for more specific types of teachings. It also allowed the teachings to address people's individual stages of development in a far more specific way. What I love about the Udānavarga, what I find so fascinating, is that the teachings on the surface level appear so direct, so simple. You feel like, oh, it almost is a little bit, feels like so pedagogically limiting, just didactic. And yet, when you read the commentary to this, which sadly is only available in Tibetan, what you find out is these teachings are enormously, deep and profound and go far beyond what you would think on the surface of them. So the idea that I came up with at some point was that you could really do a very in-depth study on the figures of speech and how they achieve this polyvalence in the teaching. Okay, now I'm going to shift the direction of this talk a little bit on the subject of poetics, okay? Sanskrit poetics or Indian poetics, which I think we were discussing over lunch with some people, is commonly known as Alaṅkāra Shastra. People know what alam means? Alam in Hindi or in... Good, good, sufficient, good. Kara means making. Alaṅkāra means making good. That's the most basic etymological meaning. But the most common meaning by convention is ornamentation, jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, etc., diadems, alaṅkāra. When you ornament something, you make it more beautiful. In the context of literary criticism, alaṅkāras mean figures of speech. And these are contrasted with, are known as the gunas. Gunas are qualities, sort of. So if you were to make the human parallel, gunas would be something like heroism, bravery, sweetness, kindness, more we would say intrinsic features, whereas alaṅkāras would be something which enhance the beauties of somebody's inherent capacities, And the same thing is true with literature. So the gunas tended to apply mostly to the sound and, quality of a poem, mating a certain type of feature of the meaning. Is it a forceful meaning? Are there forceful sounds? Is it the feeling very sweet? Is the feeling very lucid and clear? Is the meaning very lucid? How easy is it to understand? Ornaments, on the other hand, create a different level of experience. Now, you would tend to think that maybe gunas would be the more beloved and more important feature, but as it turns out, alaṅkāras probably were the most popular and distinctive feature of poetry. And so that's why the scholar Vamana says that poetry is recognized, okay? Kavyam grahyam, maybe grasp or recognize, alaṅkārat, because of figures of speech, because of ornamentation. And indeed, the field of poetics itself gets called Alaṅkāra Shastra, right? So therefore, it is the Shastra regarding alaṅkāra, all right? So, okay, well, at time there were other, the field of poetics grew a lot and other issues became perhaps even more important than alaṅkāra. But in some views, in other words, alaṅkāras, figures of speech became directed towards a more emotional type of experience, catharsis, etc., that pertain to universal feelings and experiences of poetry. But alaṅkāra remained, a critical feature of poetics. Okay, so I think you know where I'm going now in terms of how we're going to look at these verses from the Udānavarga. Or there, before we move on, I think we have a question. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Were you saying the alaṅkāra led to the catharsis, or catharsis was separate from alaṅkāra? Were you saying that the alaṅkāra led to catharsis, or catharsis was considered something separate and it not the device that brings it about?
Neither.
Okay.
But what I would say is that alaṅkāras are figures of speech. Figures of speech create a kind of the experience of chamatkara, a delightful type of experience that comes when the mind has to go through different conceptual linguistic pathways to understand what something is being said. So it hits you in a way that you're not predicting, okay? So that sort of circuited nature by chitriya, right, or vyakti, according to some traditions, or is by many accounts where the joy of poetry comes in. But other people felt that really, and this goes back to the dramatic tradition, that the joy of poetry comes from an experience of rasa. Rasa is related to, different feelings, 8 or 9 feelings, erotic, comical, wrathful, ferocious, terrified experience, disgusting experiences even, or pitiful experiences, tragic experiences, and lastly, shanta rasa, which is the experience of tranquility. And all of these are related to certain emotions and certain means of expression. And so rasa comes about from a skillful evocation of rasa by means of different types of, in drama, you would say different types of actings and situations, and then transitory types of emotional experiences that actors will go through. Okay, that's a rasa tradition. With time, the alankaras get directed. Alankaras are important, but they are actually subordinated to the experience of rasa. So they become instrumental in being able to give rise to. Other people said that there are 2 sources of joy in poetry, one being alankara and the other being rasa. So that's a little bit of a crash course in Alankara Shastra. Here we're going to stick more to, the use of figures of speech to get to more sophisticated types of teachings that allowed them to, that allowed the type of polyvalence that I was talking about earlier. Okay, so I think we can, begin to pull up the. Is that up there? Oh, okay. Okay. One thing I would mention about the use of Sanskrit in the Udānavarga and other scriptures is that the time when these controversies were arising, the use of Sanskrit, right, because it came from a tradition of more sophisticated terminology and philosophical expression, allowed for greater authority and was very advantageous in debates. And so, and also as the tradition became more proselytic, it became advantageous to appeal to more sophisticated types of students. So for instance, the great philosopher Vasubandhu came from a Brahmanical background. There were a number of teachings who were educated, knew Sanskrit grammar perfectly, knew the different philosophical traditions, okay? And Buddhist practice became more scholastic in nature. All right, here we go. We'll begin with this verse that I found like really important and lovely. And I think since recitation is such an important part of your practice, would people like to recite these together? Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, so I'll read it once, and then we'll read it, I think we'll read it pada by pada. Can we do that, you think? Quarters? Okay, let's do it that way. Okay, this is verse 4 of the first chapter on impermanence. Ko nu harsha ka ananda evam prajvalite sati andakaram pravishtaha sta praditam nagaveshata. Ko nu harshaha. Ka ananda. Evam prajvalite sati. Andakaram pravishtaha. Sta pradipam nagaveshata. This is a little irregularly metrically and also grammatically, but it's a beautiful verse. What happiness there, what delight, amid a fire raging so. Would you enter a dark room and not search for a lamp? Okay, interesting, okay, very interesting. In some degree, pretty direct, right? The concept of a raging fire, right? In Buddhism, this would apply to samsara, more specifically to the pitfalls of birth, old age, sickness, and death, right? And which are, emphasized as the unavoidable. It is the motivation for renunciation. But then the second verse, the second half of the verse, okay, would you enter a dark room and not search for a lamp? What does the dark room have to do with the raging fire? What might a dark room apply to in Buddhism? Someone have an idea? Exactly. Very, very good. Yeah, to ignorance. Okay. Now, there is technically a form of virodha here, a contradiction, because how can you have a raging fire in a dark room? So in terms of the imagery, there's certainly contradiction there. So how do we establish a relationship between the two elements of the verse? I know you guys are trained in terms of the sound and vibration of Sanskrit, but it's also important to contemplate the meaning even as you do that. And it's very beneficial as well.
Rephrase the question, please.
What's the relationship between the two? Yes, in the back. I think you're right there. There is a paradox, and the paradox will cause you to contemplate deeper and to think about it deeper as well. What about at a figurative level? Yes?
When you have a raging fire, then it's just not a light.
Yes.
And you try to avoid that because you don't want to see it, or it's too much. But then when you go into the dark room, you want to see, you want to see, so you want that light. So one way you're avoiding it, but at the same time you need it. Or should you need it?
Very good point. Very good point. I like your interpretation. I'm sorry, this is causing a lot. I think, can everybody hear if we're just talking? Oh, you need it for the... Okay, go on. That is a good conjecture. That is a good conjecture. Some people might agree with you there. Yes?
What it makes me think of is going into a dark room and thrashing to try and find some light, and like the thrashing being like the fire. Like so.
What would the cause of samsara be, according to Buddhism? Anybody know? There's more than one answer here.
Avidya.
Impermanence is certainly a cause of suffering. There are three types of suffering: the suffering of impermanence, the suffering of suffering, and the suffering of conditioned changes. So that is a type of suffering. But when they talk about, right, there are four noble truths. What are the four noble truths? Dukkha, suffering.
Suffering.
Udāya, the cause of suffering, the origin of suffering. The path, right? And the way out, which is the marga, and then the cause of the path. Eightfold Noble Path, yes.
But also karma is cause of suffering, right? Karma or delusion, and delusion coupled, maybe?
Karma definitely is, in klesha, definitely a cause of suffering. Trishna, craving, desire and craving. According to the Agama traditions, particularly the renunciant traditions, cause of suffering is craving, attachment to desires. Okay. What's the cause of attachment to desire? Ignorance, avidya. Okay, so you have a causal relationship here between the second half of the verse, which is avidya, and then the samsara, the raging fire of samsara, which is the imagistic content of the first half of the verse. So that's a figure of speech known as hetu, or cause. Okay? So you have it work here. You have virodha, contradiction. You have allegory, samasokti, and you have hetu. you have something else involved here. Okay, I'm going to recite it again for you. Ko nu harshaha ka ananda evam prajalite sati andakaram pravishtaha sta pradipam gaveshata. What do you hear there? Students of poetry, literature. Yep, you got it. Alliteration. Right? Alliteration. Repetition of phonemes, okay? So, if you consider that. Now there are two types of figures of speech. Some which refer to sound, acoustic figures of speech. Others which refer to meaning. So, shabda alankara, those the figures of speech that apply to sound, acoustic. And artha alankara, those that appeal to meaning, metaphor, simile, right? Different types. Viroda that I spoke about before. Examine this, how this works. Okay? So look at the sounds involved there and where they are. Ko nu harsha ka ananda. And then at the end there, second line, andakaram, ka ka ka. What's the joy? What's the absence, right? That's the suffering. And then you have andakaram. So the alliteration actually draws attention to the very parallels, the very relationships that he's trying to establish. You pay attention to the way people speak, their cadence, etc. Very often that gives a clue to what their intention is, where they're going, what they're saying. The same thing is true with alliteration in the use of poetry. It's not just about sounding pretty. Okay. Now, one thing I just want to mention how the commentator speaks about this, because I find it very fascinating. Okay. First of all, when we spoke about the different genres of Buddhist scripture, we mentioned a genre called Nidana, which were the background stories. So this story actually has a background story, okay? Which is to say that one time during the rainy season, when the monks were gathered in Shravasti, practicing meditation, usually they would go from place to place every 3 weeks. Many of the verses in the Udānavarga appear because the monks are traveling and they notice something, or the Buddha noticed something, and he takes that opportunity to teach. During the rainy season, right, very often the monks were left to their own devices, and rather than meditating, they would start to gossip and talk about things. And one of the things that they like to talk about is, boys will do what is desirable. And on one occasion, they're having this discussion, and sort of being good monks, they're keeping it on the clean side, and they're saying, what is happiness, right? And the body brings pleasure, and possessions provide happiness, right? This is what one of them was saying. How so? Well, when they're used and maintained properly, the former brings pleasure, and the latter happiness. Now, and the Buddha, in his omniscience, of course, he knew what the monks were talking about, and he decided that this would be a good time to give them a little teaching. Okay, and at which point he, criticized them for it, and that's when he actually recited this verse. So this verse was actually a critique on the monks for their idle gossip, thinking that somehow in samsara you can get bodily pleasure and pleasure from your possessions. Now, Pragavarman also explains, he goes through a sort of a questioning regarding this verse, similar to what we just did. He said, when the world can be seen, right? Whence the obscuration? Why is there darkness? We see everything. Why is there ignorance? We see the world. I see everything. The very world seen is explained as just this, availing darkness. In essence, our very seeing of samsara, our obsession with things, our attachment to things, is the darkness that veils. Okay? It's pretty. Now, this is what I was speaking about the polyvalence and about the use of figures of speech and the need to really ruminate on these verses, not just to stick with the sort of immediate pedagogical appeal to the verse. Mm-hmm. So, if samsara is a raging fire, why do we squander our chance to escape? by distorting ourselves with worldly pleasure. More succinctly put, are pleasures actually pleasurable? So to the sophisticated students, the application of figures of speech of virodha, contradiction, and hetu, causation, would actually encourage a deeper level of introspection regarding the second noble truth, right? The origin of suffering in their meditations. Okay, I think let's go to the next verse.
Quick question?
Yes.
Are these your translations?
Yes.
Yes. Quite good.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So the number 2, is that tam patru? Yep. Okay. So I'll read it once and then we'll read it together. Pada by pada. Tam putra pashu samatam yasaktam manasam naram suptam gramam mahaugaiva mrityur adaya gachati. Okay, together. Tam putra pashu samatam yasakta manasam naram suptam gramam mahaugaiva mrityur adaya gachati. Okay. Death seizes those with minds enthralled by love of heirs and livestock, like a flood that sweeps away a village as it sleeps. And similarly, the next one, I'll read it once. Madhuraga vipaketu katuka yabinandita kama dahanti balan ulkevan muchata karam. This one's a little difficult. Okay, Andy? I'll do it slowly, and you repeat. Madhuraga vipaketu katuka yabinandita kama dahanti vaibalan kama dahanti vaibalan ulkeva munchata karam. Very good. Pleasures taste, we'll go to the first one, okay? Death seizes those with minds enthralled by love of air. Oh, we did that one already. Pleasures tasting sweet as first ripen into bitter fruit. Like torches when not cast aside, at end they burn the childish hand. Okay, so these are quite direct, right? They would impress a young novitiate pretty directly, pretty clear instruction about proper monastic conduct, okay? The importance of non-attachment to desires, okay? And also not becoming obsessed with things and allowing your sense of meaning in life to be determined by what you possess. And as a monk, you don't get to possess very much, okay? But on the other hand, again, look at the use of alliteration in the verse. Putra pashu, right? Tam samattam manasam naram suptam gramam, right? So the overripening fruit, right, is a metaphor for the wounding after effect of desire. The hand that refuses to relinquish a torus before it burns a hand as a metaphor for clinging, right? These are pretty straightforward, but both still offer more subtle instructions on causality and conditioning, okay? Now, here's one that's a little more hopeful. I'm sorry, we're supposed to talk about hope at this. Ratakara iva charmana parikartan upanaham yad yaj jahati kamanam tat tat sampajate sukam. Okay, together. Ratakara iva charmana Parikartan upanahan yad yaj jahati kamanam tattat sampadyate sukham. Excess leather trimmed away, the cobbler shapes the shoe. Each desire cast aside, the greater bliss instilled. There you have pretty, direct, but at the same time, there's a little bit of reward involved here for one's renunciation. Okay. However, don't get complacent yet. The next one. This is actually is 4 quarters, 6 quarters, so it's what we might consider a verse and a half. Frequently you find in Sanskrit poetry that we would like it to be one discrete verse, one discrete meaning, but very often a teaching meaning requires a verse and a half. Kamanda jala prakshiptas trishnaya chadita praja pramatta bandhane bada matsyavat kupina mukhe charamarannam ayanti vatsa pakka iva. Oh. Rattaka, Did I cut that out? Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, and go down again? Sure. Kamanda jala prakshiptas trisnaya chadita praja pramatta bandhane bada matsyavat kubina mukhe chara maranam ayanti vatsakshira pakka eva. Swept into the dark net of desire, enshrouded by craving are creatures, bound by the fetters of heedlessness, trapped like fish by the grate of a net. Thus they course toward old age and death, with the thirst of a calf for its mother. That's really very beautiful, but very sad, I have to say. Yeah. So here I just want to draw attention to the subtlety and the precision and the detail of this allegory. So it's an overall allegory, but yet it also, all the pieces fit together so lovely. And here we have, what you require here is a little bit of understanding about Indian fishing methodology. And some of you who have traveled maybe to Kerala, anybody ever taken a houseboat in Kerala? Have you seen the grates that they have? So you would have a trap which basically has enough room between the wooden slats that allow fish to get swept into it. But when fish swim, right, they need to wiggle their tail so they can't get out. It's very, very cruel. And so what happens is, the metaphor, clearly I think you understand, the passions and desires sweep the individual into the trap, okay? They're further bound by their heedlessness because they can't recognize when desire is emerging. Okay, so we talk about meditative practice in Buddhism. 3 types of mental attitudes are essential. One would be heedfulness, maybe underemphasized in Western training in meditation, where smriti, mindfulness or recollection is considered the most important thing. But in the typical training, 3 things: heedfulness, vigilance, and mindfulness all together. Okay, so the fish get swept in by their desire, right? Then they can't get out on account of the grates. And then, the overriding idea of it is quite sad, that it is the people course towards old age and death with our thirst, by way of our thirst, which is as intrinsic, unfortunately, as, just an infant's need for milk. Now, what can be done with that, of course, right, is more and more subtle analysis and introspection meditatively that allows people to, become aware of these processes in the mind. Now, there are three types of craving, right, that you find. But the two most cogent ones in Buddhism are craving for existence, which is being spoken to here, and the other one is craving for non-existence. I'm laughing to make light of it, but these are really, difficult things to deal with. So we tend to vacillate between those two types of craving. Yeah.
Did you say craving for existence? Because isn't that craving for existence, right?
Yes.
But isn't that like involuntary? I mean, that's what you should. I mean, maybe craving for rebirth. Because when you're alive, you want to be alive. You don't want to die, right?
Yeah, we have survival, yes.
So why would there be a craving?
Let her finish. Okay.
This can be easily answered from evolutionary biology, from the single cell organism that we were, to all this complex eukaryote system. The single thing that drives is wanting to survive.
Right.
Once we're born, it's not at the individual level that he's talking, but on part of the species and indeed life, to conserve and maximize energy. It is the drive to survive that creates all this complexity. And that's it.
So if you didn't have that drive, that means you were really self-harming yourself.
Yes, so this is where the philosophy comes in. The nature has endowed one with all these survival instincts, including our sense organs, but that also comes at a cost that they put us in a closed system beyond which we are incapable of processing. So philosophy is working with your karmas to figure out how, instead of bonding you, they will liberate you. And that's what is addressing.
Thank you. That's a very good point. So don't forget, right, there is the instinctual drive for existence and survival. There is a spirit of renunciation that comes in some people, right, to want to, find liberation from samsara. It's one thing to, naturally, instinctually survive. It's another thing to crave it and be attached to it in such a way that you perpetuate ignorance. Okay, that's the fine distinction that adepts were trained to make. Of course, they go begging for food. They don't starve to death. Okay, yeah. They take care of their body. They take care of their mind like they would with, for any other being, right? The idea is you cultivate this so that you can find liberation. Okay, not for just, satisfaction, pleasure. Okay, and this is in renunciant tradition. It gets much more complicated when you get to Mahayana philosophy, and then even more complicated with Vajrayana philosophy. Okay, one more verse. Do we have time, I think? Okay, wonderful. That's great. Do we have the next one there? Yeah, okay. This is really lovely and fascinating, I find. Channam eva vivarshati vivritam nabivarshati tasmadhi channam vivaret evam tam nabivarshati. You want to read? Together. Channam eva vivarshati vivritam nabivarshati tasmadhi channam vivaret evam tam nabivarshati. So that's a combination of Anushtup, traditional shloka, and a form of called Bhavi Pula. Showers fall when it is veiled. Its veil removed, the showers cease. Thus you should remove the veil. Such showers then will flow no more. Okay, now this verse in terms of sound, Shabdalankara doesn't have the same splendor of alliteration. Okay, that's clear. But there are some very interesting semantic figures of speech going on here. Anybody notice something interesting about this verse?
Repetition of words.
Well, there's repetition, definitely. Mm-hmm. I think we can all hear Nabi Varshati.
Yeah, the repetition of Nabi Varshati.
Yes, yeah, that is. Yeah? Oh, I thought I saw a hand there. What's the, yeah?
It's kind of like a contradicting, because when you have a whale, it doesn't make sense.
That it should shower, right? Yeah. Okay, that's very excellent. Okay, so there's a figure in Sanskrit called vibhavana, where you have an effect, but you don't have the proper cause for it. Okay, so technically you have a showering, but you don't have the proper cause for it because there is a veiling, covering. Or you might think of it, there is covering, there shouldn't be showering. So it could be the opposite, which is called visheshokti, where you have the cause, but you don't have the effect. There's also a riddle here, isn't there? Yeah, there's a riddle at work here. What's the subject of the metaphor, of the allegory? Do we know? Anybody want to venture a guess for what the subject of the allegory is here? Good. That I think at one level that is true. What's the tenor of the vehicle? What's the operative? The sky. The sky. That's the tenor means what the vehicle is the sky, right? When the sky is covered with clouds, it doesn't rain. Okay. The tenor of the vehicle, that is the subject, you're saying is the mind. Hence, when the mind has obscurations or ignorance, when it's covered, right, then there's going to be misdeeds, there's going to be ignorance, so things are going to shower. There's going to be some form. Okay, and I think that makes sense to me, because there's something called outflows in Buddhism, astrava, and outflows emerge from negative karma. Negative karma emerges from ignorance, right? Okay, and also mental affliction, kleshas, addictions, etc. These are that's a very good, so, misdeeds of body, speech, and mind. Okay, however, the commentator, which totally surprised me, I didn't get this at all, because I went along the lines of your interpretation, explained the background story for this. And as it turns out, there is a requirement in Buddhist practice, in monastic Buddhism, where every fortnight monks would gather as a sangha and monks would confess their transgressions. And it was believed that if you did not confess your transgression, then it would transform into outflow, which would create further suffering, okay, further negative karma, and would perpetuate, okay, this cycle.
In a way, you were kind of burning your karma by just like talking about it.
Well, confessing, okay?
Yeah.
So, confession gets a bad rap in Western culture because of certain abuses, but actually it's, I think, in all religions, admitting your wrongdoing is very important for purification. When
Liberating, so in a way it is liberating.
Yes.
It's like you letting it,
Correct, it does shower forth at that point. So when you take the veil away, then the outflows cease. When you confess, I think it's a very skilled interpretation here. Now, what I love about this verse, or I think is very fascinating, is there's a figure of speech in Sanskrit known as apanuti. H-N-U-T-I, apanuti, which means concealment, where you conceal some element of verse, such as the tenor of a metaphor, the subject of a metaphor. So here what you have operating is you have a figure of speech called concealment, which is dealing with concealment. I think it's really quite brilliant and apropos. So I hope I've been able to give some sense of how the figurative landscape in the Udānavarga actually succeeds in being able to communicate important Buddhist teachings at a variety of levels that would have been applicable to adepts at all stages of training, and in doing so would also provide a pretty strong sense of literary satisfaction as well. Yeah, you have a...
This is for the online people, it's not for us.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. First, the context of these are these are like discrete aphorisms, or are they linked together? And these are excerpts pulled from a larger piece that where like one verse relates to another.
These are all kind of gems of teachings that were offered on occasion. And in this way, they're a little similar to, you recited from Bhartahari's, right? Which Shataka? Was it the Amara Shataka? Which Shataka? Oh, sorry, Niti Shataka, okay. So from the Niti Shataka, these are all what we call muktikas, independent verses, and independent teaching verses, which were then compiled later according to, chapter topics. These are extracted for the purpose of illustrating the function, the form and function of figures of speech in the Udānavarga.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question, I'm not sure what you meant by heedfulness and meditation. Like I don't know what that means.
Okay. The metaphor that I always think of, I'm not sure if it's, completely consistent with tradition, is mindfulness keeps your eyes on the road, remembering that you need to look at the road. Heedfulness lets you know if there's a car in your blind spot. Right? So, desires are coming, they're a little small, you're paying attention to your breath, but, there's also something else emerging in your mind as you think you're paying attention to your breath. And if you don't catch it early enough, all of a sudden you're not thinking about your breath anymore.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. Shanta, please.
David, you mentioned some work or experience you had in Nepal. Can you tell us where that was?
Kathmandu, I studied with a young scholar at the Nepal German Research Institute, which was the forerunner of NGMPP, the Nepal German Manuscript Collection Project, which then, or preservation, and then they microfilmed it as well. So that went on for, I think, a good 15 years, I think, 10 or 15 years. Yeah.
Any relationship to Namo Buddha, the retreat, the Buddhist retreat?
I studied at a Buddha Shedra there as well, up in Hadigara Baspari. Yeah, it was Nyingma University at the time. Any other questions or comments?
Just a little apanuti, concealment, you said?
Apnuti means concealment, yes. Yep.
I guess must you tap before you speak, I guess. More information about these verses. These are gems that are selected and were put together, compiled in some other form. And are you picking then some of these out for your own interest, or are you?
We are translating the entire 1,080 verses and the commentary of 1,000 pages.
So this is a work in progress.
This is a work in progress.
And you have some sense of when it might be available to other folks?
Hopefully within 2 years, the first volume, and within 5 years totally, all 3 volumes, the complete commentary, which is the Udānavarga Vivarana, without which I think people will miss a great deal of the meaning of these verses. Yeah. Oh, he just, I think, yeah.
I just wanted to say what struck me is beautiful. I don't know if there's any relation, but it almost felt a little bit like haiku, the translation. Did anyone else feel that? Haiku poetry? It's not the form or anything. It just had that, you know, the English translation had some...
We both have a, yeah.
Don't know how to explain it, but it felt, you know, like just the impression. It's very visual, and then just letting it sit, and the person reading can interpret, or it. Yeah, that's how I felt.
Thank you very much. I'll take that as, you know, we've worked pretty hard on these. I have a background in poetics, and my translation partner specializes in Tibetan. I also read Tibetan. Is a musician, a lyricist. So I think between the two, we argue a lot. Sometimes brutally, but it always, I think, is constructive. Yeah.
It reminded me of Kay Ryan. Do you know her work at all?
Mm.
Because it's like, well, maybe you can explain why you haven't spoken.
Oh, well, there's my favorite poem of hers. I think it's called The Will to Divest. And these poems feel like that. I think that's what Anna was speaking to. You know, it's so succinct. You know, no word wasted, not a drop wasted. I think that's what people are feeling, that it's really...
She's also like really direct.
Exactly. It's very direct and like just gets right at it.
So much bigger than her directness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's what we're striving for, and that's constructive. I'll take that, as I say, as encouragement to keep going, because that's what I feel about the verses, that they have to be accessible to, you know, the even beginning students, but on the other hand, they have to, you know, really expound on a much larger range of meaning and level and, you know, degrees of experience and expertise at the same time. And if we can get that done, you know, it's been translated twice. We're not satisfied. I don't think anybody is really satisfied with those translations. I think with the commentary companion, I think it will be a valuable contribution, I hope. So, yeah. Thank you very much for, we have enough.
I just wanted to say that it's so comforting to know that you're working on this and that this is being created now that you're making these translations. It's just beautiful, and it just gives me hope.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you all. Very great.